What's it worth? Uh-uh, uh-uh, uh-uh. What's it worth? Uh-uh, uh-uh.
Welcome, everybody, to the Total Innovation Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Simon Hill. And today's a little different. No guest, no interview. You're stuck with just me. Because today we're recording episode 50 of the podcast. And I thought it was worth pausing for a moment before we dive into all the exciting episodes coming next to look back at what we've done, where we've been, what we've learned, and what I think so far it all adds up to. 50 episodes, 4 seasons, give or take, and one big, stubborn, endlessly fascinating question. What does it actually take to make innovation work? So, today's episode is that. It's a little bit of a time to stop and reflect. 50 episodes is a nice milestone. I didn't know where this was going to go when I started it. We've had some incredible guests along the way, shared some incredible insights. And this is just a little bit of a walk through some of the lessons that we've had during those different 50 episodes. In the first episode of the podcast, we welcomed Aidan McCullen on as our first ever guest. And I chose Aidan deliberately. We'd been sparring as friends and adversaries and colleagues in the innovation space for a while. And when this thing started to take shape in my head, the idea of total innovation and the podcast, Aidan was one of the first natural people that I went to. His background as a former professional rugby player and now a best-selling author, an award-winning innovation speaker, the host of the incredible Innovation Show podcast, and just a great, sharp thinker on all of the different parallels and trials and tribulations of what comes out of this broad topic of innovation. And he's spoken to many and most of the big thinkers within the space. I saw our podcast as complementary, actually. He digs deep into the theory that sits behind this incredible work with some of the sharpest minds throughout time on it. And I wanted this podcast to be a little bit more applied than sort of that, to get into the weeds of the parallels, the learnings, the practicalities of innovation at the grassroots level, in the real world, outside of textbooks, outside of theory, and much more into practice. In that first conversation with Aidan, he told me about Toulouse Rugby Club, one of the greatest club sides the sport has ever produced, and how they built something that wasn't just about winning on the pitch. It was about polyvalent players, about deep culture, consistent vision, and the coaches who celebrated the right kind of mistakes with bonne idée, the coach would say, even when it didn't come off, because the spirit was right. And that's a concept I think we've tried to come back to time and time again across this podcast. The idea that culture isn't a poster on the wall. It's whether people are rewarded for trying the right thing, even when it fails. At the heart and soul of it, that's innovation. Not, though, just innovation for theatre's sake, innovation directed and achieving new value. And that swept us nicely into the next 2 episodes, where we welcomed in Carl Reader from ExxonMobil. We did 2 episodes with Carl because there was just so much richness and too much to cram into one episode. That was actually the top episode of season 1 in terms of readership. Thank you, everybody. Kyle built an open innovation capability at ExxonMobil from a standing start in less than 18 months, doing something remarkable. He talked initially to about 200 people across the organization, doing 5 interviews a day and just listening. What struck me from Carl's story was his framework for thinking about where knowledge actually lives inside an organization. He called it levels. Level 0, your immediate team. Level 1, the adjacent teams around the same function. All the way out to level 6, the global crowd, people whose expertise you would never even think to ask. I recommend listening to this episode. It's deeply rich and insightful. Carl's point was that half of his best projects ended in those early levels, not by going outside, but by finding someone 3 floors away in a different business unit who'd been working on the same problem for 20 years. We have a habit in innovation of looking outward when the answer is sometimes right there in a silo that we haven't opened. I guess the point really here is we don't know where the best answers come from. And the more that we can open up to different perspectives and different viewpoints, whether they're in the corridor 3 floors away or whether they're in a different domain and a different part of the world, the answers almost certainly exist out there. And being willing to open up just a little and hopefully a lot can have huge value from an organizational perspective. If we reach forward further into season 1, episode 7, we welcome Steve Rader from NASA. And honestly, Steve might have one of the most quietly extraordinary jobs in the world, as he built and ran the Center for Excellence for Collaborative Innovation, COACI, at NASA. Essentially, he ran open innovation for NASA and for lots of different parts of the US federal government as well, running 850 challenges and counting with a huge success rate, 90+%, $112 million spent at the time that we had spoken to him in terms of awards, and over $170 million in estimated savings just through the process alone, before we get into the benefits of the innovation that came out of it, through a more efficient and a more effective realm of people, but also with a team in total of just 12. That number stuck with me from the conversation, because think about the scale and the scope and the size of what we were talking about, but also, and how few people it took to run that, comparative to what we might be resourcing into many of our innovation efforts across our organizations today. Additionally, Steve shared with us the idea of resistance. Even at NASA, even with rocket scientists who have literally sent humans to the moon, there was pushback when open innovation arrived, because it felt like someone outside was maybe someone inside was questioning the expertise of these deep specialists, these deep experts in their different domains. And he made a point that still echoes, which is, we're not going outside. We're not looking beyond the realms of our internal specialists because people are not good enough. We're going outside because no single person can possibly know or track every relevant technology, every relevant trend, every relevant field at the pace the world is moving today. The answer to the challenge might be sitting in another domain, in agriculture or mining, completely outside of the thematic and the industry, whether that's space or something else, using different language to describe the same underlying problem. Equally, with over 1 million new startups a day, it is just impossible for any team to keep on top of that, even with agentic capabilities. Open innovation is a navigation tool in a world that can increasingly overwhelm. In episode 5, Steven Shapiro introduced us to his latest book, Pivotal. And I loved Steven's central argument that the problem with modern organizations is not that they're not innovative, it's that they're innovating quite often in the wrong places. His central argument was innovate where you differentiate, a phrase or a term to sit with for a little while. He had this language of the planted foot. I love this, a basketball analogy, and that the pivot only works because there's a foot that doesn't move. Most companies, he argued, are so obsessed with the moving foot that they've forgotten what they're standing on, what makes them distinctive, what the world actually values that only they can give. And that sits right at the heart of the total innovation idea that we talk about in the podcast and more broadly through the thought leadership and work that we do. You need to know your planted foot before you can move with any coherence at all. And if we think about the world of innovation, the world of agentic development, the speed at which we are experimenting today, how much are we doing that with the idea of a planted foot underneath us? A good friend, Natalie Nahai, joined us for episode 6, and she brought something that the rest of the season didn't quite have, a warning. Natalie's a digital psychologist, and her focus is ethics in the age of AI. Natalie reminded us that we are fundamentally meaning-making creatures. We anthropomorphize anything that talks back to us. We did it with Elisa in the 1960s, a simple pattern-matching chatbot at MIT that made people feel genuinely listened to. And now we're doing it with systems of incomparably greater sophistication. Her phrase stuck with me which is don't let the tail wag the dog, a phrase I tend to use quite often myself in a variety of different contexts. In this case, she was talking about let's not start with what's possible and chase it, but let's start with what we as an organization, as a society, as a species want to do, and then ask whether the tools that we're using are tools that will help to serve that outcome that we're trying to drive. That's not a break on innovation. It's what separates genuine innovation from expensive theatre. Another great episode I would advise people to go back and have a listen to. In episode 9, we brought an entrepreneur and a startup into the room. Runa Reistrup, former CEO of Depop and currently leading Juno, a man who grew up on the Faroe Islands of 50,000 people, a collection of rocks in the North Atlantic, and built $1 billion company. What I love about Runa's story is the diffusion of the innovation angle. He'd read Everett Rogers, and the adopter curve was baked into his thinking from the beginning. When at the start of Depop, 9 out of 10 people downloaded the app and thought it wasn't for them, he didn't panic. That was the strategy. You build for the one, your target audience, and then the early majority arrives, then the late majority. The 9 who said no become your biggest users, eventually. The danger, he told us, is when organizations treat that 9 as a reason to kill the project. That's how the culture eats the innovation every single time, we posited. I want to talk a little bit about a cluster of episodes that explored something I'd call institutional innovation. Not the startup in the garage, but larger, established, sometimes bureaucratic systems trying to do something genuinely new. A good friend, B. Schofield from Lloyd's Banking Group, talks about innovation centers as enablement, not a separate team doing cool things, but a function that helps the whole organization find better and the right ideas. Ian Small gave us the story of building a water innovation ecosystem. Balaji Bondili, formerly of Deloitte Pixel, showed us how a consultancy created an internal startup, literally pixelating the workforce into modular, on-demand talent. And Sonia Ferreira of Mesh walked us through how they've built an incredible innovation ecosystem. And then Gina Lucarelli in episode 48 told us something that really did blow the scale and stopped us in our tracks a little bit. Gina built, and this is a real story, 90 accelerator labs across 115 countries for the United Nations Development Programme, not in sequence, in parallel, all at once. And the guiding principle was what she called directed improvisation. And here's a red line she spoke about, not to cross. No fraud, don't hurt people, don't steal intellectual property. Pretty obvious stuff. But beyond that, let's figure it out. Let's go out there and do it. That culture of trust and that idea of, experimentation within sensible bounds rather than overly restricted, overly bureaucratic. Gina described sending a team to Lesotho who went on an innovation walk and found a farmer who'd invented a pesticide by accidentally stepping on a grasshopper and noticing eventually that the remnants of that grasshopper kept other insects away. He'd been doing it for years. He'd seen this for years, and nobody knew. Uncovering these user-led innovations that could perhaps have ramifications and interest for further people was at the heart of the labs that she had built. 6,500 solutions mapped by people who were just paying attention. There's lots of great stories out there. It's also what happens when you trust. It is not a uniquely humanitarian principle. It is the most powerful innovation principle we can all embrace. In episode 10, Greg Sotelo reminded us that ideas don't fail because his message, build your coalitions before you need them. Change takes time. It moves through networks, not announcements. Particularly so, I would argue, in the modern world. Tom Goodwin in episode 7 gave us his characteristically provocative view that digital isn't a thing, it's everything. Technology is the new normal. The question isn't whether you're digital, it's whether you understand what the tools you're using are actually for. A great question, particularly with all of the buzz around AI, agentic, LLMs, and everything that goes with that at the moment. Gijs van Wulfen on breaking innovation barriers, Dr. Nadia Jeksembayeva on reinvention, Team Bernstein on unlocking impact from open innovation, Jayshree Seth on innovation, thought leadership. Jayshree is a chief science advocate at 3M and one of the most thoughtful people we've had on the podcast about what it means to genuinely champion innovation inside a complex and innovative organization, how to build your internal brand and leadership within that setting. And then there was season 3, a season that went a little bit of a different direction. It saw me take a step back from interviews for a while and put something personal into the world. In September last year, I published my latest book, Expected Value. And thanks to our sponsor, Wazoku, we ran the full audio version of it across the whole season, chapter by chapter, as a podcast exclusive release. Expected Value was written out of frustration, not at innovation teams. They're some of the most passionate, committed, and incredible people I've had the privilege of encountering and working with. The frustration was at the system, at the measurement vacuum that surrounds so much innovation work. The book follows Freya, a director of innovation strategy at a fictional financial services firm. She walks into her annual review with 37 pilots, 72% uplift in idea submissions, 4 hackathons, 5 startup partnerships. And the CFO asks her one killer question. That's great, but what's the value of all of this? And like many of us, she doesn't have an answer, not a real one. The rest of the book is about building that answer, a system called Expected Value, XV, combining confidence, predicted value, time sensitivity, and strategic fit, and an efficiency lens that shows you the cost per point of expected value so you can compare internal development, external collaboration, open innovation, and everything in between on equal terms. It also helps to see the efficiency of the experiments and the innovation bets that we are placing in a holistic portfolio view. I'm not saying this system is perfect, but I am saying that without some version of it, we're always one bad quarter away from having our innovation budgets cut and our programs quietly shelved. We spent decades building the funnel. It's time that we built the proof. The latest season, season 4, kicked off with the incredible Alexander Osterwalder and a conversation that was, one of my favorite in many ways. Alex has arguably done more than anyone alive to change how organizations think about their business models. The business model canvas, strategizer, the value proposition canvas, millions of people have used these tools and engaged with his company. And his message sitting here in 2026 was more urgent than ever. The business model is no longer a fixed asset. It's a hypothesis. And the same forces that allow organizations to scale faster than ever can cause a business model to expire faster than any leadership team expects. This is, we both argued, probably the biggest period of business model disruption we've ever seen. He made a point that I found quietly devastating in its simplicity. Most boards of directors still hire a CEO to run a company, not to reinvent it. And until boards start hiring leaders who are capable of doing both running the machine and rebuilding it at the same time, disruption will keep winning. I fundamentally, as we will all know, support that perspective. It's both explore and exploit, but I would argue perhaps it's something more fundamentally different than that, and that perhaps that language of explore and exploit is itself of an older world. This dual mandate is blending and becoming more synchronous within itself. And it is a thing that almost nobody actually does well. Additional voices in season 4, Robin Bolton in episode 42 talked about the value gap, the distance between what innovation teams believe they're creating and what business leaders actually see. Her argument centrally was that most innovation fails not in the lab, but in the handover from the lab. When the torch passes from the builders to the scalers, something essentially gets lost. Is it urgency? Is it context? The belief is that this particular thing matters, and we have to zone in on that and make sure that that handover is effective. Otherwise, we get what we get, and we know the metrics behind that. Martin Erickson and the Decision Stack, Tom Staley on why open innovation still fails, Marta Jacob on aligning strategy, innovation, and AI, Mike Butcher, MBE, a tech journalist and co-founder of the new media firm Pathfounders, talking about tech truth and finding the path through the noise from all of his incredible perspective, but also on building a new media business in this new era as well. All incredible guests, all sharing incredible stories as we go. And then the most recent episode 49, with Samuel Arbesman, a complexity scientist, a writer, and one of the most enjoyable minds I've encountered on the topics that surround complexity and deep thinking. His book, The Half-Life of Facts, is a book I love, and I just had to get Sam on. It is built on the beautiful and slightly unsettling idea that facts have a shelf life, perhaps not unsettling, perhaps obvious. That the things we've learned, the certainties of our fields, the numbers we quote in confidence, they decay sometimes slowly, sometimes rapidly, at a rate you can almost measure, and nobody sends you a notification when they do. He told me about his grandfather, a dentist who went through his entire career believing the human body contained 48 chromosomes because the textbooks were wrong for decades. It's 46. His point, we're all carrying outdated knowledge, not because we're careless, but because knowledge changes. And sometimes our understanding of that knowledge changes more slowly, often for deeply cultural reasons. The expert is sometimes the least useful person in the room, not because they're not brilliant, but because their expertise is precisely bounded, and the answer might be sitting just outside those bounds. This is the topic that I spend much of my career focusing on, and actually believe deeply in, as many of you will know. Which brings me all the way somehow back to episode 1 and Aidan McCullen and the polyvalent player and the power of someone who can operate in multiple positions. At the end of the day, perhaps what we need are greater generalists, bounded by incredible specialists, with our focus looking beyond the domain that we are immediately drawn to look at when trying to do innovation. And so what does 50 episodes add up to? And, talking through these, here's my honest attempt at a synthesis. The thread that runs through all of it, from rugby pictures to lunar missions, from Faroese entrepreneurs to UN innovation labs to financial services boardrooms, is this. Innovation doesn't fail because of bad ideas. It fails because of bad systems. Systems that don't know how to measure value. Systems that kill the right kind of mistake. Systems that reward activity over outcomes, outputs over impacts, the funnel over the proven return. And additionally, alongside that the answer is almost never where you expect to find it. It might be the farmer in Lesotho, the quantum physicist who answered a NASA challenge about cosmic radiation, the 16-year-old Depop user running a small empire from their bedroom, the complexity scientist who realized that facts expire. The people closest to the problem are often not the people best placed to solve it. The person from outside the domain often sees something the domain expert has learned to stop seeing, or perhaps they were never capable of seeing. And that is the total innovation thesis. It's not a department. It's not a budget line. It is a mindset distributed across an entire organization, one that knows its planted foot, one that experiments rigorously from there, measures honestly, kills gracefully, and trusts in the power of a genuinely diverse, heterogeneous crowd. And so in closing, I said at the start of this podcast that I wanted to make the invisible visible. I believe there are more brilliant innovations happening in organizations right now than anybody is able to see and acknowledge, and that much of it fails not because it wasn't good enough, but because we couldn't prove it. We couldn't effectively communicate it or protect it. I hope in some way that the 50 episodes of this podcast so far have helped to make more of that visible. I hope it's given us one idea or one framework or one connection that changed somehow something about the way we think about the work that we do or how we do it. Because really, that's what this is all for. There are many more great episodes coming. I'm committed to continuing with great conversations, greater depth, and bringing more incredible evidence to bear, from innovation beyond theatre to innovation as performance. If you've been listening since episode 1, thank you very much. We built a really loyal listenership. If you've just found us, welcome to the podcast, and the back catalogue is all there for you. To every guest who gave their time and their thinking to this podcast, I am genuinely grateful. This whole thing is built on your ideas, and I often talk about standing on the shoulders of giants. As always, I'm Simon Hill, and this has been the Total Innovation Podcast. Thank you for 50 great episodes. Here's to 50 great more. Let's keep going. Thank you.
What's it worth?